Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Am Reading video for Friday, February 18th, 2022. Definitely on a Saturday, but I figured I'd keep my little naming technique. This video, after all, colludes to my week in reading, basically, so a lot of stuff basically since last week's video. Anyway, that's how these things work. I got a little bit of a late start, later than I hoped. But hopefully onward and upward from here. I'll start these videos as I have since last May by discussing the next short story in this collection from Dorothy Parker's collected short stories. The one I read this week is called The Young Woman in Green Lace, which she published in 1932. It's longer than her usual dashed off stories, but in much the same vein. It's about a conversation between a young man and a young woman, and it specifically puts the young woman's behavior, I think, in a critical light. They're meeting, as characters often do in Parker's stories, at a dinner party. Awkwardly kind of thrown together. There's, a question of like whether or not the host is supposed to do it for them, but they kind of end up, I think, together more on their own this time. And we learn that the woman has recently returned from Paris, and she just can't help, peppering her language with a lot of French phrases, and just can't stop talking about Paris this, Paris that, how different Paris is from America, how weird it is, like, the culture shock of being in this new place. Although pretty early in the story, we come to understand that her trip to Paris lasted all of 3 weeks. So I guess in modern terminology, she'd be something like a poser or something like that. So anyway, here's this young man trying to impress her with New York City and what it has to offer, but she refuses to think that New York would have anything better than Paris. I don't know, maybe we're being a bit cruel to her. Maybe she's never been to New York and this is strange territory for her, but certainly from the dialogue and Parker's past framing of characters, I think this is meant to be a commentary on someone who is putting on a bit of an act and sounds a lot more ridiculous than she thinks she does. The next book I'll discuss I started last week and have now since finished. It's called The Loved Ones by Sonya Chung, which I read because it was near the top of my Goodreads TBR. I was kind of hopeful at the end of last video about this book, but ultimately I'm mostly disappointed in it, I think. It's been weird to deal with because this book got some really favorable reviews. Especially nice because it's from a small press, but very few people seem to pick up on or be, I guess, disturbed by what I was disturbed by in this book, which follows a few characters with the last name of Lee, although they're from different families. But anyway, the story is sort of the inciting incident is when Hannah Lee, a Korean-American young girl, becomes the babysitter for the Lee children, who are the children of Charles Lee, an African-American man, and his white wife Alice. So she's babysitting them, Vida and Benny, and they go to Rehoboth Beach, which is in Delaware. I've been there myself a lot of times on vacation, and tragedy strikes, and it basically veers everyone's lives into different directions. And I feel like what Chung is trying to do, one provocative thing she's trying to do that I actually didn't have as much problem with, in a controversial way, is talk about this tragedy in a way that maybe it isn't so much of a tragedy. In fact, the tragedy kind of impelled characters onto paths that maybe they wanted to have taken or would have been healthier for them, but for reasons that a backstory chapter gets into, they weren't able to take at the time. But the tragedy helped them get to this new state, although there is a lot of trauma and grief from said tragedy that they have to go through as well. So I thought that was interesting, and there's some interesting clashes, I guess, between like, parallels maybe is more accurate, between like Charles and Alice versus Hannah's parents. Charles and Alice got married quite suddenly after dating only a little while when Alice fell pregnant. They each maybe would have wanted to do different things, but didn't get the chance to. And then in a similar vein, Hannah's parents married without the blessings of their parents, so they kind of, in a way, went the opposite direction, where they're like, this is the path we want to take, and we're going to take it, but then there's a bunch of external plot forces, basically, that made their choice rather harmful. Or, I mean, it's not only the external plot, like, they're Korean people, and they're, getting married and eloping and all that during the Korean War, and in fact, Hannah's father was previously married, and he abandons his wife, and that leads to some horrible things because of the war, but, maybe she could have been saved if, her husband hadn't abandoned her. So they grow privy to this. They actually had left the family for like 20 years, like running and hiding, because, they also were victimized by the war, and they ultimately ended up in the U.S., and they come home when the father's father dies, Hannah's grandfather dies, and that's when they learn what happened, and that their family really has completely written them off by this point, and they're so, they feel such guilt or trauma about it that they sort of put a kibosh on their own love and become very emotionally distant people with themselves and also with their children, which, is difficult. I'll just put my own bias on the table when it comes to psychology, that it wasn't the healthiest choice for Hannah to grow up with that. But this tragedy does actually get her away from her parents as well, and sets her on a new direction. So I thought all that stuff was interesting. We continue to follow these characters throughout a couple more decades. But the thing I didn't like so much was the relationship between Charles and Hannah, which really just was squicky. And I think they had a sexual liaison when Hannah was 13. She doesn't say it in so many words, and I feel like that's because she knows it will come off as abusive. But from the section where it's talked about and what Hannah talks about with her sexual experience later in life, that this happened, and she's trying to, justify it with quotes from, Colette's Claudine novels, like, oh, we can't be so, puritanical about love, but it was squicky, we have a 30-something-year-old man and a 13-year-old girl, and I am not going to use French literature to justify that. I just felt like it just was squicky, and it did not work for me in terms of a love affair or something that was healthy for them. I feel like there just had to be better ways to talk about the fact that maybe an adult and a teenager could forge a connection other than having them have sex, So I was pretty squicked out by it. I think a couple of other reviewers I saw on Goodreads were as well, but a lot of people weren't, including in the professional book community. I don't know. There's a weird disconnect going on here. I don't know what it's about, but what I will say is that, the Keira Knightley version of Claudine, the author that Hannah references in this book, I have loved that trailer for that movie for so long that I haven't actually ever seen the movie because I'm worried it wouldn't live up to the trailer. I just love that trailer. Maybe it's because I've had a thing for Keira Knightley, and she's finally playing a character who has, attraction to women. I don't know. I'm hoping that story with Claudine is less squicky than what's going on here. It certainly seems a lot more adult and consensual in the trailer anyway. Maybe I should just read the Claudine books instead, Anyway, speaking of young women and squicky sexual relationships, I will go to my next book that I finished this week. This is The Girls by Emma Cline, which was the book I chose in my latest page 112 tag, which I'll link down below. This book is loosely based off of the Charles Manson family and murders, but what interested Cline more was I feel like I think she wanted to explore why young women would put themselves in this situation, which actually I don't really feel like she explored all that well at all. What she explored was the desire for young women to break free of conventionality, the messages they get from broader society about their worth, particularly to men, and how that manifests into how they see themselves, and how they interact as, you know, hormones are growing and relations are changing, and you're trying to get more autonomy. And, you know, it's especially for young women who certainly, I think, do fit the cult brand of feeling misunderstood in their normal lives, to the extent of really wanting someone, anyone, to pay attention to them. And in fact, the real, you know, relationship here is between Cline's protagonist, Evie, and the woman who inducts her into this Manson-esque cult, Suzanne. And that's really the person who she becomes obsessed with. And it talks a bit even about how Suzanne grooms her and that sort of thing. So that sort of stuff worked for me. The cult stuff didn't really work for me. I felt like, well, it was such a pale imitation of the Manson family stuff. I mean, I know it wasn't supposed to be the Manson family stuff, although a lot of the plot beats were the same about, you know, Russell, the cult owner, like wanting to be a musician and, you know, sort of living some sort of life with Hollywood and espousing, you know, philosophy about, you know, anti-capitalism, I suppose, technically in a vague sense it is. But, you know, Manson stuff was a lot bigger than that. You know, he was a white supremacist. He was trying to incite a race war. That's really what compelled him to, you know, get the murders going, is he wanted to incite this race war, whereas the murders in this book are about petty revenge. It's much different. And I feel like, you know, that stuff wasn't really all that well explained at all, because I don't think Evie really knew why any of this was really happening. I mean, other than Russell wanted it, but like, why were these women so into him at all? I mean, I just feel like that stuff wasn't really all that well explained, or, you know, believable, I suppose, is a better word. It wasn't the focus, but the fact is that the murders that happen in this book are a big focal point of the book. But anyway, what actually worked better for me were some interstitial chapters, sort of framing device chapters, because Evie is looking back through time, you know, like, you know, the Charles Manson family. This cult is taking place in 1969, but in the framing chapter, she's a middle-aged woman in, you know, roughly modern age, and she is privy to relations between her friend's 20-year-old son and a young girl he's sleeping with, maybe a late teens young girl. And I feel like that stuff was much more authentic in how women and young girls, you know, attach themselves to dangerous men who don't really care about them. I feel like that just felt much more realistic to me, and certainly creepier and scarier in that way, especially because it was happening kind of in real time, whereas Evie was looking back on things in the past for her own teenage storyline. But I loved the writing. It was descriptive. I thought the gender commentary was largely on point, other than I guess the weirdness with the cult. So I still really enjoyed the reading experience, but it kind of missed the mark for me as well. And then I just started this book, A Fortunate Age by Joanna Smith Rakoff, which I'm starting now because it also reached the top of my Goodreads TBR. The last year I did choose it as a page 112 tag possibility, and I didn't go through with it, but that always makes me excited that I finally get to pick it up, even though I didn't choose it then. This is a group of friends story. I think it's supposed to look into the cultural life of a group of young women who graduate from humanities and English courses in, you know, undergrad and graduate school, and move to New York to, you know, continue their education or to, you know, go into the arts or something like that. And I think it's going to follow them for a few years, tracking their lives. They're Gen Xers. I think this story is taking place around 9/11, like shortly before to shortly after. They are Jewish characters, and already there's been some Jewish culture in here I've appreciated. It started with a wedding, so the wedding took place in a synagogue, so that was kind of nice. I enjoy that aspect. This is also sort of a retelling of a Mary McCarthy novel from the 1930s, I believe, which followed a group of girlfriends who were moving to New York in that time. So this is kind of an homage in that sort of way, and an update. I guess I might want to see about adding that book to my TBR as well. Anyway, I like this so far. It's slow going. I'm only a couple of chapters into it. It's definitely a slower read than the girls. I feel like the writing style is just a little less snappy, I suppose, or maybe it's just because the subject matter is a lot, more tame. But still, I love ruminations on what it means to grow up, basically. So I'm still all for it, and I will be checking back next week about how I feel about the ending of this novel. But wait, there's more. There is another book that I actually finished this week just now. It is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, which I listened to on audio. And I'm mentioning it now because even though I finished it, I can't say much about it. I'll just say that it is a near future story told from the perspective of an android. But I can't give you my full thoughts on it because I read it for the BookTube prize. Usually I announce my BookTube prize reading before I start it, but in this case I just have so much reading I want to get to, and I had the time to listen to this on audio, so I got it out of the way. I feel thrilled about that. Hopefully I can get through the rest of my reading this month. We'll see. But anyway, to get back to the BookTube prize, it was started by Robert at Barter Hordes in 2019. Over 300 judges internationally are taking part, and we are judging the best in U.S. published translated fiction, literary fiction, and nonfiction published last year. So I am judging a fiction group for round one, the octafinals round, which will conclude at the end of March, and that's when I can officially tell you what I thought about these books and how I ranked them, which ones I hope will go on to the quarterfinals. But for now, if you want to learn more about the BookTube prize or my preliminary thoughts about my group, I will leave links down below. So that about covers it for me now. As I'm filming this, I still have a lot of weekend ahead of me. In fact, it is a 3-day weekend in the US because we have a federal holiday on Monday, which is President's Day. And oh boy, do I need all this time, because I do, as I mentioned before, have so much reading I want to get through in February, and we basically have a week left. And so, yeah, reading as in BookTube prize reading, as in other, novel-length projects I want to get to, and also I want to get to some literary journal reading, because the next time you see me on this channel, it will be for a review of a couple of literary journals, where I'll be reading and discussing some short stories, so stay tuned for that. I hope you're being productive with your reading, or whatever you want to get through, or relaxing if that's what you want to do. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.